Welcome along. Westerley VR Racing, that's virtual racing, Series 2 and race number 2. This one entitled A Game of Chess. So, you might ask, what's a game of chess got to do with cycling? Apart from the fact with e-racing, such as RGT, you will be sitting on your backside, shall we say, and staring at something and thinking about it. Beyond that, I think chess and e-racing on RGT probably have very little in common. So yes, you will have to strategize, you'll have to think about what your opponent's thinking, and you will be sitting down. But the real reason it's called a game of chess is because, as you'll see in a moment, we're going to go along the Chess Valley. That's the River Chess. And I don't know from where it gets its name, or whether it's named after the game, or there's any connection whatsoever. But I'm sure that if you Google it, you might find some sort of origin. We're going to basically go through this village, which is Cheynes, which there'll be a lot more about in a moment. And we're about to go down a substantial dip into the valley. We're going to go along the river to, you won't see the river because we're just a few hundred metres from it, but you'll see the valley we're in. And we're going to go along to Chesham, which is Ches, and then Ham. I think Ham is an old Anglo-Saxon word for village or settlement. Certainly we still use the word hamlet for very small villages. So here we are, we're in Cheynes, which is a typical English village. And on the left there, if you go up there, there is what is Cheynes Manor, which has substantial history. And given that I'm going to be going along a valley for some time, I'm going to use that in the commentary quite a lot. But first and foremost, this is a key point. Just as we come out of Cheynes, we get this very, very fast descent. So if you are one of those people that can get on the front and absolutely cane it down this descent, you might see some gaps. Now, these are sometimes made up because if the gap is only, let's say, a dozen riders and there's a huge peloton behind, it will probably get drawn back. So it may not be the best tactical move to try and separate yourself this early in the race using the descent. But nevertheless, you know, if a sizable peloton gets away and you're not in it, you're going to be left behind. So I think the key is it's probably not so much a place to attack, but it's a place not to get caught out. And you'll see we're still sort of declining a little bit as we hit the Chess Valley. And we are going to go along the side of the valley on this side now all the way to Chesham and back. And although I'm afraid the GoPro, because it's on the handlebars, isn't high enough to see quite over those hedges, you'll probably get the idea that if you look to your right on the screen, the valley and the river is just over there, sort of 100, 200 metres away, sinking down. And you can just see the hills on the other side where it comes up the other side of the valley. So we're going along this valley, as I say, with the river probably 100 metres, maybe 200 metres to our right. And to our left, there's a steep escarpment all the way along the valley, with some particularly steep climbs that we sometimes use on our club rides. Not so much going up them as going down them, I'm afraid, because they're not the easiest to get up there. They're short, but they're very, very steep. I think the first one we're going to come across, Stony Lane, is something like 20%. It's short, but it's quite steep up. And in fact, even when we come down it's a little bit dangerous because it comes down to a crossroads with this road, which is a busier road. So when you're coming down it, you can't make the most of that steep descent because you need to have some fingers on the brakes so that you don't go steaming into this road and find yourself meeting a motorist through his windscreen. So this is fairly flat. There is one little bump about halfway down that is of note, and we're not too far away from it, and you'll probably notice it as we go through it. So here's the first crossroads, and this is Stony Lane to our left. That's a very, very steep one, about 20% up that. And on the right, it takes us down to Latimer and Flaundon, which are two very, very pretty villages. As I say, on the left there was Stony Lane, the steep one. And you can see, if you look to the left, just how steep that climb is up to the top of that hill there, which is pretty much runs along the side of the valley. There's another road to our left a little bit further on. In fact, we're going to pass two roads on our left that have got very steep ascents up that same escarpment. And you can see as well, if you look to the field on your right, how much it's dipping down there. But because we're going along the side of the valley, this is very, very flat, apart from the one little bump that I mentioned earlier. So I've got to commentate on this. Now we're coming back down the same road as well, which means that I've got to commentate on this twice, and it's very difficult to, I suppose, dream up things to say in the second phase when it's exactly the same as the first phase, which is broadly very, very flat. We're heading towards Chesham. We're broadly in what I would call Chalfont, perhaps. It is, I mean, certainly if you go left up one of those lanes, you end up in Chalfont anyway. So quite whether we're in Chalfont or not, I'm not 100% sure, but certainly to our left, if you go up that hill, that escarpment, at any point you're in Chalfont. But we're heading directly to Chesham. When we get there, we're just going to loop round and come back. It's not round a roundabout at the end, like a lot of time trials might be or something like that. We are going to go through something similar to a one-way system where we veer to the left, go round and meet a bit of traffic in the town centre, but then quickly peel back onto this road and rejoin where we left it. So as I say, strategically, you're going to have that big drop out of Cheynes as you start, or shortly after you start, less than a kilometre, I would guess. And after that, you've got this straight sprint up to Chesham, loop back again. There is a lump, it's a very small lump, but nevertheless it's there. As I say, we're coming up to that second climb. You see the turning left there, that's the second of the steep climbs up the escarpment to our left. So as I say, we come back from Chesham. There is a little bump in the middle. It's not going to seriously be noticeable, I suppose, during an RGT ride. But as I've seen in recent races, sometimes a slight incline can actually split a few people off the back of a group. So you can certainly thin a group on the little bump, an intermediate bump, which we've already done, by the way. And we'll notice more on the way back, I think. So once you've done that descent, as I say, apart from that little bump, which is probably a bit early to use, but you might thin the pack a little bit, it's going to be all about the race back. And the race back will certainly have that bump, where I think, if you're in a group of 20, it could be 15 by the time you've gone over that bump, because you'll certainly lose people who are tiring and perhaps haven't got quite enough left to just stay on the back of the pack over that lump. And then you've got the climb of the descent that we did earlier, if that makes sense. So yes, we descended when we were coming out of Cheynes, but as we go back up to Cheynes, that is quite a steep climb. Now, I say it's quite a steep climb. It's not very long, but it's steep enough to be noticeable. And certainly if we do club rides and we've been out and sort of done 150 kilometres or something like that, for example, it's one of those that's on the way home. So our recollections of it are probably that it's miles harder than it really is, because we're always doing it at the end of the ride rather than the beginning. Of course, you're going to hit it if you have been flat out during the ride. You need to just have something for that Cheynes climb at the end. We'll see what it feels like as we do the return. It goes up again past Cheynes Manor, which I pointed out earlier on, which we shall be talking about on the way back, because there's not going to be too much descriptive about this road. As I say, it's going to just look the same, but from the other direction. At the moment, where the slope downwards is on our right and the hill is on the left, it's going to be the other way around, of course. And we are coming back on exactly this road. So, as I say, apart from the view being slightly different, you're not really going to notice it. So, a tiny bit of a little incline here, I guess. It's, as I say, you might or might not feel that on RGT. And again, you might feel it more on the way back than you will on the way out. As I say, especially when some legs are tiring, you might lose a few people. So just notice that little bump there as well. And we're getting closer and closer to Chesham. Chesham, as I say, CHES and then Ham on the end, meaning village or settlement. So I assume that the River Chess and Chesham get their name from the same origins, although I don't know what that origin is. And I don't know which came first, the name of the river or the name of the town. And perhaps somebody watching might know more about that than me. It's an odd town. It's in South Buckinghamshire, a very sort of wealthy part of Britain. It's slightly odd in the sense that it's quite clearly had an industrial past, in the way that some of the other villages and towns like Amersham and the Chalfonts have clearly had rural market town pasts and sort of prettier. Chesham's got some very, very pretty parts, but it's quite clearly been built around some industry too, and the planners haven't been too bothered about the aesthetics of everything in the town when they've been letting buildings go up. So it kind of looks very pretty in parts and a little bit sort of higgledy-piggledy and made up as it went along at others. So it's a strange town. It's but of course, with most of its industry now long since disappeared, it's lucky to have an outlying underground station. I say underground, it's not actually under the ground, but the London Underground stretches out here, albeit above ground. And I think between Chesham and Amersham, these must be the two farthest stations on the London Underground system outside London. Certainly if you commute from here, which is great because it will take you right into the centre of London, right through to the city. Your fares are somewhat higher than if you live in the Greater London area. And that's because, for some reason or other, Buckinghamshire County Council don't contribute to subsidising the fares. So, whereas if you live in London, the fare rate is subsidised. It isn't out here. So, as I say, kilometre for kilometre or mile for mile, a tube journey costs a lot more out here than it does if you're actually within the Greater London zone. But what a service. Live all the way out here into the countryside and you can live and work. Well, you can live out here and work in London, right in the centre of London. And the trains are quite fast as well, especially for a metropolitan railway. And in fact, it is the Metropolitan line. So, as I say, for an urban rail commuter rail service, it's surprisingly fast. And some trains are faster than others where they miss out the stations and what have you. So, quite a desirable area, but the Metropolitan line, which is sort of running a little bit to our left, I mean, it's not immediately to our left, it's kind of way the other side of the escarpment we were talking about. As I say, it runs out. So a lot of these villages like Chalfont, Amersham and Chorleywood, all very much commuter belt, and property prices go up. As I say, Chesham not the cutest of them as we go through this set of roadworks. I do find the road surfaces in South Buckinghamshire tend to be a bit rough and ready and not well maintained, which is amazing because, as I say, it's one of the richest areas in the country. It's it's not a cheap place to live, and there's a lot of nice houses out here. So why the roads are rough, I don't know, but I suppose all the wealthy inhabitants can afford 4x4 vehicles, so they probably don't notice it so much. I do wonder when I see roadworks whether they're actually here making the road surface worse or better. Never seems to improve much, as you can see. But for all that, there is some fantastic cycling out here in South Bucks and the Chilterns. This area, I assume, would have been what is known as the Chiltern Hundreds back in whenever, hundreds of years ago. The Chiltern Hundreds, I don't think anybody quite knows what the term hundreds means, but it's an old word meaning district. So there are various theories as to what hundreds mean, but it's not necessarily 100 in terms of any sort of land measure. It's probably more like, an area split into 100 villages, or maybe one theory is, I think that in the old days when countries didn't have standing armies and each village had to provide men at arms for wars, it was sort of 100 places, or an area which had to provide 100 men at arms for any war that the nation found itself within. And of course, we all know that in medieval times, football was banned so that men could practice their archery, and there was a certain amount of pressure that men all practiced in some shape, manner or form in their part-time for war. And I suppose, that's probably what you had to do if you didn't have a standing army. Anyway, never mind the standing. We're back here sitting on our saddle, and this is where the road splits. So we've just taken a left there and into what I'm going to loosely describe as a one-way system. Certainly you're forced to go left there and go down this road to get it in the centre of Chesham. And it's as I say, not when we're coming back, you'll see it's not exactly a one-way road coming the other way, but it is designed to split the traffic up, so you go this way into the town and come back the other way where that little split is. And of course, I think we went over the River Chess there just as we were turning left, and it's on our right just about now. Now, this might not look like you're in the town because it looks fairly sort of, I suppose, countryside-ish in the sense that there's grass and trees. But here we go. We're going to go under the Metropolitan Line Railway. So this is the far reaches of the London Underground. I think it's just a single track into Chesham. It's a little bit of a branch off from Chalfont and Latimer, I think. So here we are. You can see now this looks much more like the town as we come into it. Now, we're going to hit the main road and we will hit some traffic momentarily along here as we come up to this roundabout by, I think, Chesham United's football ground. And you may never have heard of Chesham United, but I think they won the Amateur Cup in 1968, which in 1968 was a big thing. It was held at the Wembley Stadium, the National Stadium, and they used to get huge crowds for that back in those days. I think it was disbanded at some point in the late 70s, and it's probably the FA Vase now in effect, although I think a lot of the teams that won the old Amateur Cup will now be in the FA Trophy. So it's a kind of second-tier version of what Britain's main cup competition, the FA Cup, is. As I say, Chesham United, proud winners at Wembley in front of a large crowd back then. A long time ago now, of course, looking at 50 years ago. Not too many people remember that. So this is where we turn back now onto the road we were on before. So that's it. That's the town. That's the traffic done. This is not actually a one-way road, but it sort of is because you can't get out the other end where we were forced to turn right. But nevertheless, you can come in and out of here. As you can see, there's a car going the other way. And as we go through Chesham, you'll see that it's, in terms of town planning, it's just all sorts of mix of old and new buildings as we go onto the Metropolitan Line Railway once again on our way out over some particularly poor road surface. Well done, South Buckinghamshire Council. It's, as I say, I think that's the River Chess just to our right there. It's, as I say, Chesham's not been particularly planned for in a way that keeps all the buildings in character with the town. And as I say, its history is semi-industrial. So like a lot of industrial towns, it was the pragmatism of what was needed for the workforce way above what was needed for any tourism industry. So you'll see prettier villages and towns than this in South Buckinghamshire. Nevertheless, there is a very, very nice bit of Chesham. Let's not put it down too much. Now you can see just on right there, over that fence is the River Chess, and we're about to come up to the split in the road. So we're rejoining where we, here we are, just here. So that's where we turned left before and went into the one-way system, and we're now back on the road we were coming from. As I say, absolutely pan flat. We've just got the little bumps along the way in the middle, and we have the big climb up to Cheynes. So strategically, I think the first split might be on the descent from Cheynes. Secondly, you might shed a few out of the first group or even second group or whatever on the little bumps along the way. Coming back, again, you might shed a few of the more tiring riders on the couple of bumps along the way back towards Cheynes. But it's the Cheynes Hill, probably 2 or 3 kilometres from the end, that is really going to be, I think, where the race is decided. If you get over Cheynes Hill and you're in a group of 2 or 3, then obviously you can sprint it out and duke it out at the finish, because there is a flat after the Cheynes Hill. But like I say, I think that is going to be the decisive moment. So basically, it's, as I say, if you're feeling good at the moment, just look for those couple of bumps as they come up. Just watch the profile in the top right-hand corner of your screen when you're riding on RGT. Look out for those little bumps, because if you can actually just put a little bit of pressure on there, you might get somebody dropping off the back. And we all know that if you do drop off the back, it can sometimes be very, very hard to get on again. As in fact, I found during a club's team time trial on RGT recently, when unfortunately my internet connection went on my computer, but my phone was still recording the race, and I was still on the screen for everybody else, but I couldn't see anything. And this is well worth noting that if your computer screen drops out on RGT, you're not necessarily out the race. And what you can do is look at your phone, and whilst it won't really show you all the people around you, what you can tell is the distances. So, if you happen to be up front and you're on the same distance as everybody else, I mean, you might not spot the attacks, but you kind of know where you are. Nevertheless, it is hard, as I found out yesterday. I was always guessing, and at one point I found myself 10-15 meters off the group. I mean, it was kind of amusing at some points where I was actually leading the group without having a clue that I was at the front of our little team, because I didn't have anything visual to do the sort of line up for the team time trial. But people were screaming at me because we had the phone line open, and people were sort of, "Oh, you're off the front, you're going too fast," and you'd slow down. "Oh, if you're off the back now." But without that visual target, I just found at one point I was still matching everybody for output and power and kilowatts per gram, but I couldn't. I couldn't make it up because I just once off the back. It required rather more than I'd got to get back on again, even though I could probably match everybody in the sprint ahead. So I just told them to go ahead and not slow down and spoil the first 3 times for me. So as I say, if you go back to this race that we're previewing now, if you can get to these little bumps and just put the pressure on a little bit, you might shed a few riders off the back. If you're at the back of a little group, just look out for that, because if you don't respond quick enough, you might find yourself off the back. And like me in the time trial I did yesterday before recording this, then you will find it very, very difficult to get back on. So I think I was further impeded by the fact I didn't realise I was off the back till everybody told me. By then it was probably going to be difficult to catch up again. So here we go. This is very, very marginally going up a little bit. So, just be aware that there will be points where, although you're not actually climbing, it's going to require that slight bit of effort, just because things are sort of very, very slowly increasing. Now we're powering exactly along the same valley as we described before, and not surprisingly, as I mentioned before, you can see that the road rises to our right up to that hill up the top of Stony Lane and sinks down to our left down to the River Chess. So you can see that side road there, what the gradient looks like if we were going in the opposite direction. Now we are beginning to sort of hit one of those little peaks. You can see the car going up there now. So whereabouts that car is probably the high point of this little bump. And as I say, you notice this bump more on the way back than you actually do on the way out. So that's probably about it, even though it's probably a bit of a false flat here. We're slightly higher up the valley, but that's about it. And you can see the car in front of us is just sinking away. So we've done it now. And you'll see it's much more gradual going down this side, which is why you notice it less on the way out. So again, you're probably 2/3 of the way through the race by here, maybe 3/4. And you really do, if you're feeling good and you can sort of put some pressure on that bump, you are going to shed riders. You won't get rid of the best, but you'll certainly shed it down and sort of start whittling down who you really got to compete with when we come to the big climb at Cheney's. So obviously, because you go over a bump, you get a slight descent on this side. It's not massive, it'll make the riding easier, but then again, there'll be somebody with good cadence making the most of this. And so I wouldn't let up and assume that you've got a respite before the big climb up to Cheney's. Now, Cheney's, as I said, it's quite an interesting place. The Cheney's Manor's up there. Apparently, Cheney's Manor, or once called Cheney's Palace, I'm told, was a residence of high-ranking people since the 12th century, as far as I'm aware. They're not quite sure how old the current buildings are, but there is a suspicion that the place was much bigger, and over the years, I think it was owned by the Cheney family, which is where the village Cheney's gets its name from. And over the years, it passed to various people through marriages and debts and what have you, and ended up with the Dukes of Bedford owning it. And they weren't there for that long. They moved up to Woburn Abbey, and if you've ever been to Woburn Abbey, you'll know that it's a massive stately home further up in Bedfordshire, with its own safari park and all sorts of other tourist attractions. And I think Cheney's, although they still owned it, was less, shall we say, important in their estates. But what it was only recently that I got the connection, because I certainly, with a mate of mine, Liam Fitzpatrick, if you're watching Liam, I was out on a ride up in Woburn, and we went past Woburn Abbey, and he was pointing out to me that the buildings that were owned by the Duke of Bedford had a letter B engraved on the buildings, and it showed that they were part of the Duke of Bedford's estate. And I could never work out why there were buildings with these same Bs on down here in Cheyney's, which is relatively, if you happen to live in the USA, is probably near Woburn Abbey. But if you happen to live in Buckinghamshire and Bedfordshire, you would not think that Cheyney's and Woburn were local to each other. It's all relative, I guess. But certainly for the Middle Ages, or whenever, probably later than that. But certainly, maybe the Middle Ages. But certainly for the Middle Ages or later, perhaps the 15th century, you wouldn't have you wouldn't have assumed that somewhere out here would have a link to somewhere in Bedfordshire. And it was only recently that I found out that they had, for one reason or another, acquired this estate and owned the other one, and actually originally lived here, and then moved to the more palatial, more splendour and everything else up in Woburn Abbey. Nevertheless, I did find out that the Dukes of Bedford and the Bedford family, or whatever their other name is, are all still buried in Cheyney's, actually. So despite the fact I think they don't own the manor anymore, that's Stony Lane to the right, so we're getting closer and closer to Cheyney's. So, as I say, they all buried here, even though the estate is, of course, all centred around Woburn Abbey. Anyway, I mean, it did change hands over the years, and it's one of those places you can actually go and visit. It's a Tudor mansion, and it is available to hire for weddings. And in fact, my sister had her wedding there. Yeah, I mean, it's quite amazing. It's got lots of those things that those old houses have, like a priest hole, which is a place, if you were Catholic during the Reformation, and your priests used to have to hide, and the priest hole was a sort of secret passage and room where a priest could live in case Protestant authorities were coming around to check that you weren't practicing Catholicism. It was also connected to the English Civil War, I believe, and I'm slightly confused if it has a priest hole, that I think the owners were on the parliamentarian side, which suggests they were Protestants and not Catholics, but certainly parliamentarian soldiers were garrisoned there. I think this area generally is parliamentarian, I would guess, because certainly John Hampden, who was one of the 5 MPs who started the protests which led to the Civil War, was from Hampden, funnily enough, which is not far from here, only a few miles behind us in the direction we're going. So, and I think he was killed at the Battle of Chalgrove, which is another few miles beyond Hampden. So, as I say, I mean, I think parliamentarians were probably in the majority, certainly up at the upper echelons of society in this area. So here we go. Now we're going into the Cheyney's climb. This is the little warm-up bit as we go up here, and we're going to go around a right-hand bend. And as soon as you go around that right-hand bend, you hit the steepest part. But as I say, it's this is the end of the ride, and certainly we notice on club rides that even this first bit, even though it isn't the steepest bit, can actually just sap you that little bit after a long ride, which makes the bit around the bend, which is the steepest, feel worse than it is. And then the other psychological blow you get is when you get over the steepest bit, you get a false flat, and you feel you're at the top as the steep bit ends. So here we go around the corner on this steep bit, and past a little sign that says you can visit Cheyney's on a Wednesday. I think they hope that you're not actually going to visit it. I think there's some old tax laws where if you made your big home available for the public to view, you didn't have to pay so much tax. And so some of these houses are open at sort of times when you wouldn't really want to go, just so they fulfil their tax obligations. But as you can see, this is a steep ramp, and this is where the whole race will be decided. Typically, I often find myself, when I know the routes, because I make them, thinking, well, if I get to here, and we're just about coming up to here where that white house is, you think that's the top of the climb. And I sort of just kind of let go a little bit at places like this, and then find, because there's a false flat, that the stronger riders drift away from me at the top. And I think psychologically I need to check my thinking and realise that there is this false flat. So you can see here, although we've got over the steep bit and your eyesight's telling you, that's it, that's the hill over with, you're not. It goes round this bend again and still rises a bit more. And you can see from the picture that there is a rise there, albeit not very steep, but it's certainly, as I say, you kind of feel it. If you just burnt yourself on the warm-up bit, then the steep bit, this can just about sort of eat you up. So you go past this pub here, which hasn't got its old Citroen van out the front today, but quite often has one of those old Citroen vans you can serve little teas and coffees out of, a bit like the one Rafa has. If you've ever seen Rafa take that round to an event. So now, although again it's not quite flat here, you will actually, it is flat enough that you will speed up. And we are almost on the sprint to the finish, so it's probably less than a kilometre now to the finish. And so we go past these last few buildings and chainies, and there's a little church with some church railings on the side, and I would guess that we're getting into about 600-700 metres. So there's the church, which I always loved because it had this wonderful sign out the front once saying, "Carpenter seeks joiners." Jesus' family were carpenters, and the church, I'm sure, needs some joiners. So here we are. We're now definitely into the last 500 metres or so of the sprint, I would guess. It might be a little bit more, but we're going to come up on the main road between Rickmansworth and Amersham, and that will be the finish. And you can see now, you can see where the cars are going across the top there. That is effectively the finishing line for the race, and you won't have to brake as much as I do, because if I race over the line, I'm going to hit a car coming the other way. But I look forward to seeing you on the race. Good luck. Enjoy it. Cheers.